I would like to introduce somebody who I first need to know by show of hands, how many of you are members of the AFPC? Lots of you, great. If you agree with what I'm about to say, and even if you're not a member of the AFPC, if you agree what I'm about to say, when I give you the signal, I want you to give a warm welcome to somebody here. And it's not you, Mr. President. You come in a second. Nancy Camel, our chairwoman, is, in my opinion, just a walking miracle. And here's why. In the time that I've been a member of the AFPC, the amount that we've grown, the influence that we have, the services we provide our members is absolutely riveting. And if you agree that the person that I'm about to welcome to the podium to say a few words, if you agree that Nancy is all the things that I've just said, please join me in, as we welcome her to the podium, in applause.
Thank you, dear Mitzi. It is impossible to follow you. And I always have that responsibility because you are always one of our major leaders and wonderful voices. So I thank you for all that you do and for all that you have allowed us to do. Welcome to you all. I must begin by expressing our most sincere appreciation to Mitzi Perdue, Executive Board Member of the AFPC, as it is due to her generosity in arranging this event. We are hosted here this evening. Also, our thanks are expressed to UBS for their engagement and support in the presentation of today's significant program. We thank you both, all. It's my sincere pleasure to welcome President Dennis Francis, who served as permanent representative of Trinidad and Tobago to the United States in New York, to the United Nations in New York, before being elected on September 5th, 2023, as the president of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly. We welcome you most warmly. In his address opening this year's session, President Francis underscored the importance of peace and the, quote, ultimate goal of our collective efforts, the bedrock upon which everything we do will rest. I further quote him, "It is therefore crucial that we demonstrate both our political will and our ability to make this world a more peaceful and secure one," end quote. We, the international foreign press, hold the principles of the founding of the United Nations and the concept that no single nation should hold captive the will of the overwhelming majority. We applaud President Francis's efforts and to hold power to account. We thank you very much. President Francis, as we share the planet's resource and space, we recognize that the dangers in one region seeps into all nations. We recognize your unrelenting efforts and support towards resolving the current multiple crises, be they environmental, social, military, that are endangering us all today. We thank you and we welcome you. I also want to express our appreciation to the Rockefeller Foundation, a stellar supporter of the community of foreign correspondents. They encourage and enable us to keep the foreign correspondents in the United States informed and connected with experts on one of the most pressing issues facing our society today, climate change and its environmental impact. Marina, we thank you. And with that, I'm going to actually introduce Marina Pavlik, the director of the Rockefeller Foundation, who is here with us today. I'd like to kindly ask you to come to the stage and share your message on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation, which is a leading member in our society and investing in our future, our climate, environment, and sustainability. Marina, the stage is yours, and the microphone.
Thank you. So I'll just move this guy because I feel like it's in the way. Hi, I'm Marina Pravdic. Thank you so much for having me on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our esteemed speakers today. I just wanted to say we at the Rockefeller Foundation just a couple of months ago announced that we're going to be investing $1 billion in finding climate solutions for communities that are most vulnerable to climate change, especially in the global south. And we're going to be doing this in 4 priority areas: food, health, energy, and trying to find innovative financial mechanisms that can direct funds to increase resilience for these communities that are most affected by climate change. As we all know, this year is a very consequential year for many of us on this planet, with so many very, very important elections happening. We just saw South Africa, Mexico, India, just most recently, go through some very important election and democratic changes. So we know that climate change is on top of the agenda. And journalism is such an important part of this conversation because it is all of you here who promote good quality journalism on climate change and reporting on climate change. So we're just very excited to be able to support the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the US so that they can bring these training programs and these events to you all as a resource. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And on behalf of the AFPC, we're so grateful to what the Rockefeller Foundation is doing. Now, when I first came to the podium like 2 minutes ago, I held up something that's about 6.5 inches, weighs probably 5 ounces, and there's a fair chance that quite a few of you know about it. Anybody name what it is? Angostura bitters. And what it has to do with, I know you know, what it has to do with Trinidad Tobago is if you have had like a whiskey sour, a Manhattan, a pisco sour, a stormy night, a champagne cocktail, you've had this. But the only place in the world that makes it is Trinidad Tobago. What's special about it is it may be small, but it has a very big influence, which makes me think of our speaker. Because you come from Trinidad Tobago, but it has a huge influence because so many of the issues that your island country is up against, things like climate change, hurricanes, sea level rise, or how about for safety and security? If you don't manage like multilateral relations, Trinidad Tobago would not have the safety and security it has today. And so I feel our speaker today, has since the cradle, has been up against the kind of issues that he's followed the rest of his life as a public servant, whether as an ambassador, whether advising his country. And the great thing is that although he started out small in an island, he now influences the whole world, and the world is the better for it. And on behalf of the AFPC, we're as grateful as people can be that you're taking the time to speak with us. And I'm going to start off with a question. I'll sit while I do it. Your audience, a lot of the people, it's going to be an easy question. All my questions are softballs. No, the question that I have for you is addressing members of the foreign press in the United States. We represent more than 100 countries. In fact, let me ask Thanos. Thanos, how many countries does AFPC represent? More than 100, good. We represent more than 100 countries. What advice would you give them? What would you like them to focus on in, I'm going to give you this question in several forms, but the first one is working with, the United Nations does not function if it isn't able to navigate this very complicated sea of multilateral agreements. What should we be thinking about that maybe we're not? What should we focus on more? Or what that we're already doing, should we do more of? And it's to support multilateral agreements.
That's a very easy question to answer.
I knew it.
but there are some complications. It's easy to answer because what the world really needs to be focusing on now is to get good, solid, enduring solutions to critical problems, the magnitude and scope of which are too large and perhaps too complex for any single country or group of countries, regardless of how wealthy, regardless of the size of your military arsenal, regardless of your manufacturing and technological capacity, to solve on your own. Climate change cannot be solved unless there is cooperation, meaningful cooperation, among the 193 countries that comprise the UN. Nor can we solve the vexing issues of war and peace. And you'd notice I said war first, because we are at war. There are 55 conflicts raging around the world now. 35 of them, unfortunately, in Africa. So we are in a very troubled period. Multilateralism and multilateral diplomacy has done an enormous lot for the world over the last 80 years. It was invented out of the ashes of World War II, when mankind was determined that future generations should not suffer the scourge, the pain and suffering of war. But today is D-Day, and it's being celebrated in Normandy, as you know. But many of the people who actually fought in those wars have made the transition. We're in a new generation, one that, to a large degree, is full of hope. The technology has so changed everything that there's almost a sense nowadays that nothing is impossible anymore. And yet, we have not yet been able to internalize and really come to terms with how to establish, nurture, maintain, and keep the peace. And peace is extremely crucial because those of you who follow the markets will know this. Markets do not like war. They tumble quickly. Everything else that we do, if you think about it, we're talking about achieving sustainable development, global development, spreading development to places on the planet where it has been in chronic deficit for decades. But at the end of the day, what does it matter if you take development to those places and yet you've not been able to solve the question of peace? If people are going to be the victims of military aggression and war, what does it matter that you're talking about educating young girls in Afghanistan? What does it matter when you try to address health issues? You know, we have one now, which many of you may not be quite seized of. It's costing 5 million lives each year, and yet it's not yet in the headlines. Antimicrobial resistance. Drugs, antibiotics that can no longer mend our bodies because of misuse, excessive use, abuse. Our bodies have built up immunities to these drugs. These are things that will affect human life for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So peace really is at the center. And we need to get that right. We need to work harder at achieving it, sustaining it, nurturing it, to give each of us the opportunity to live lives of dignity. At the end of the day, I like to tell people, most people think that the UN was set up to deal with war and peace, and that is not untrue. But that was only 1/3 of the objective of the UN. There are two other pillars, key pillars of the UN, and those are to promote and defend human rights. Your dear First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, was the architect of that famous document, the Universal Declaration, which we celebrated its 75th anniversary last year. And unhappily, we are witnessing in the world today a certain pushback on human rights. It's not good for the society. And the other pillar is to promote development, because development, or lack thereof, is often a source of conflict itself. And so we are now in this place where all of these wars are raging. There's pushback on human rights. The rights of women in many parts of the world are being ignored, trampled upon, abused. So we are in a very difficult era. The question is, what do we do? We have two choices. We can either wring our palms in frustration and throw in the towel, or we can regroup, rethink, reorganize, and do what brave people do: fight. Fight for what we believe in. And that is what we are seeking to do in the UN. Because, and the UN, I should say, many people have raised questions, legitimate questions, about the value of the UN. Can it deliver? Can it do what it is supposed to do? You know, it's an expensive organization, so why do we have it if it's not solving problems? Why has the war in Gaza been allowed to go on for so long, etc.? To which I say this, and I don't take credit for it. Madeleine Albright was the one who said it. If the UN didn't exist, we would need to create it fast, because the UN is the forum. It's set up to be the forum for problem solving. That if you come to the table in good faith and you engage in dialogue with your counterparts, you can solve many of the problems that confront you. And the UN has done that to a significant degree. We've done it. We've solved issues around health, things like polio and stuff like that, measles. The World Health Organization does a phenomenal job, notwithstanding the criticisms that may have been leveled against it in the era of COVID. But it has done a phenomenal job and continues to do that job. The Food and Agriculture Organization has really made an astounding contribution to the welfare and well-being of mankind, using Professor Norman Borlaug's work in the 1960s to quadruple food production all around the world. When I was at university, I learned, and I remember this shocking me, one American farmer feeds 15 people around the world. And that was before the days of supercomputers and all of these things. I don't know what the figure is now, but I'm quite sure it's huge. It's probably one American farmer feeding 30 or 40 people.
The latest I heard was one feeds 80. And
There you go.
and that is from a couple of years ago. So
There you go. So we've made extraordinary progress. And we are in a period now where things are not going so well. We are in a period now where we are looking introspectively and trying to address our own shortcomings, but also relying on our fundamental values and principles that were the founding principles of this organization. That has to do with the primacy, above everything else, of the human person, the dignity that attends and that defines being human, and what that creates for a society and a civilization that is worth fighting for. So, for example, this year in September, we will host the Summit of the Future. We are trying to look down the road to see what will be the challenges that will confront human society and how we need to position society to cope with these challenges. Because we are very aware technology is changing by the minute, as you know, and as the technology changes, there's an impact, an immediate impact on society, on people, on how people think, how we live our lives. So for example, 2 years ago, no one was speaking about it, but now you cannot turn on the television or read the newspaper and there isn't a reference or an article, an op-ed on artificial intelligence. We're considering that in the UN, what it will mean. No doubt artificial intelligence can contribute significant benefit to the way we live our lives, our quality of lives, our ability to maybe extend life. But it comes with risks. So the question then becomes, how can we harvest the best of artificial intelligence while at the same time insulating society from the risks, minimizing the potential threats that will accompany this technology? I recently encountered someone, a professional, very professional, techie type guy, who told me something shocking. And I'll share it with you. He said to me, Ambassador, I'm sure you were not aware that artificial intelligence has the power to allow you to commit murder undetected, remotely. Because the pacemaker can be deprogrammed. It can be deprogrammed, and they will never be able to identify that this was something contrived. It would appear it's just a normal malfunction. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about the risks. So society has to make these choices. We are confronted with these choices because we may well need, I think we do need artificial intelligence. The question is, not all of us, given the diversity of what being human entails, not all of us will be minded to use it progressively and not maliciously. Yes, that's the world that we're in.
I would love to know what the United Nations can do to, or what the United Nations is doing to deal with this problem. I mean, is it committees structurally? How do you go about it?
Well, the Secretary General has established 2 committees to look at this. One is what I regard as a crackshot global science committee, the best scientists in the world. And the other one is a broader committee comprised of scientists, ethicists, psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, to look at what are the likely impacts of artificial intelligence on society. How can we modulate those risks? Do we need standards? What is it that we need? The report of that committee is due, I think, in a matter of weeks. Because the Secretary General understands that unleashing this thing on society would not be in society's best interest. The other thing is that, and this is extremely important for a number of reasons, that using AI, questions arise about the control of people's private data. Who has it? Who has access to it? What can it be used for that you won't be aware about? So this is part of a process, the Summit of the Americas, Summit of the Futures process, looking forward, that we are looking at. But after all of this, we still have to come back to the central issue of providing safe, secure neighborhoods, spaces, societies for people to grow up in, live out their dreams, for kids to self-actualize, to be their best selves, and to live lives of dignity. And that has proven of late to be increasingly elusive. It is as if when you see the images of what human beings are capable of doing to other human beings, you really take pause and wonder if in some way we are really losing our sense of what it means to be human. So peace and security is and must be the central focus of what we do. It's not the only one, it's not the only important one, but it provides the context and the backdrop for everything we do. And so the UN is very, very heavily invested in peace and security. So much so that maybe in a week or so, I'm looking currently at the practicality of traveling to South Sudan, where there's a famine on its way. Hundreds of thousands of desperate, internally displaced people, because of war in factions, find themselves in refugee camps, unable to meet their basic needs. Young children, mothers, babies with no food. But because of the fact that you have so many other things going on in the world, the media attention on Sudan has been sorely lacking. And one of the things I'm hoping to do is to use my presence to incentivize more attention on Sudan, because I think people need to know and to understand what is going on in the world, what is going on around them, and to examine ways in which they can be supportive of the people of Sudan. But it's not just in Sudan. It's in Ethiopia, it's in Somalia, it's all over. 55 raging conflicts at the same time. I don't think we've ever had so much. And yet I have to say, thank God, we've managed to avoid a third world war thus far, albeit some very unsettling noises get made from time to time about the possibility of a nuclear putsch, which of course will serve none of us well. The Ukrainians show no signs of giving up on any portion of their territory. So this war is taking much longer than anyone had anticipated. From a UN perspective, we want it done and over with, because the thing with it's war has a logic of its own that is terribly illogical. Once you get into it, I was commenting to someone yesterday, it's so much easier to get in than to get out, because how you get out matters. How you get out matters. No leader wants to be seen by his peers as weak or indecisive or easily influenced. If you lose, you probably want to lose with some dignity. So the climb down, how you get off that high horse, is important, becomes important in the psychology of leadership. And so it's very much easier to get into it than to get out. Some people never recover from the fact that the manner in which they got out was not terribly impressive. But war creates its own logic, because once you're in, you get sucked in deeper and deeper and deeper. It becomes all about vanquishing the other side. And so the human cost and other costs progressively take on the value of sort of collateral damage. How human beings on this planet can ever be considered collateral damage is something that I will never be able to understand or accept. And I don't think the UN either, because this planet is all about us. It's all about us. So, now mind you, there are wars that are unavoidable. Let's understand that. There are wars that are unavoidable. There are wars that have been approved by the UN in the past. It's a long procedure. But you don't go there unless everything else has been exhausted. So war per se is not the issue. Sometimes it is the only way to deal with an aggressor. But you avoid going to that place for as long as you can, because no one really wins. No one wins. There are no winners, there are no losers. Everyone suffers the pain and the dislocation. Every time you go to the supermarket, whether you realize it or not, you're paying for the war in Ukraine. Every time you go. Because it's affected global food supply. Supply chains have been disrupted. These things cost. So you don't have to be in the theater of war to live the effects of war. We are living them now. And so the objective has to be to try and get good, strong solutions. The UN is not the problem. People tend to overlook the fact. There are 193 states in the UN. And the UN Charter provides the framework, the rules. Well, the rules are there for the benefit of all of us. And we benefit from the rules every day, even if we are not at war. The problem arises when a member or some members decide that they're going to break the rules and believe that they can walk away from it, that there will be no consequences. If everyone followed the rules, we'd be living in utopia. There would be no tensions, no stress. But being human and imperfect, there are times when some of us decide we are going to ignore the rules in favor of our own national interests or ambitions. And so Russia invades Ukraine, violates the territorial integrity of a sovereign state. Now, for most countries in the system, like mine, a small country, 1.3 million people, no army to think of. I mean, we have a military. It's never been tested and hopefully never will. But it's there. The guarantee that we have of our sovereignty and our right to exist and to exercise jurisdiction over the territory that is Trinidad and Tobago comes from the law, the international law, that specifies it is unlawful for one country to invade another. So of course, in that configuration, Trinidad and Tobago would give its support to Ukraine. Because if you don't, you are in that very moment giving up your own defense. So the law is there to defend and to keep all of us safe. It is when countries decide to violate that law in their own narrow national interests that the problem arises. And then people say, the UN has failed. It's not the UN, it's the member states. Because the UN never chooses war. Never chooses war. The UN always, the brand of the UN is peace. That's our brand. Let's discuss it. Let us find a way out of this conflict that potentially threatens the peace, so that we do not need to resort to war. That's basically what the UN says and what we work for. Of course, that requires the agreement of both sides. And that agreement doesn't always happen. A la Gaza now. You would know that President Biden and some of the key players in the region have put on the table an agreement that would lead to a ceasefire. It's not yet been accepted. We wait every day in hope that it will be accepted, because with every passing day, lives are being lost in that conflict on both sides. The pain continues, the anguish continues, and it affects us. We may not be aware of it, but it affects us, because when you turn on the television and you see the images, that offends your sensibilities as a human being, you're affected. Kids ask questions that are difficult to answer because they don't quite understand. The General Assembly passed the first UN resolution on Gaza with very strong language. Immediate ceasefire. We never asked for any temporary ceasefire. We were about saving lives. We wanted the bloodletting to stop immediately. If you could think back, you'd remember that the Israelis had said, Mr. Netanyahu had said, we have to go into Gaza because we have to get the hostages back. So if Hamas releases the hostages, then they're released. There's no need to go in. So we insisted. Full ceasefire, full access to humanitarian aid and support for the people of Gaza, and the initiation of a political process that would eventually lead to this two-state solution, the only credible solution. Well, that was in October of last year. It took the Security Council 6 weeks later before they were able to agree a very narrowly conceived resolution on Gaza. Not as broad or as deep or as strong as the one agreed by the General Assembly. And then we took a second resolution on Gaza in the General Assembly, so that there's a sense in which, on the question of Gaza and on Ukraine, the theater of action has shifted from the Security Council to the General Assembly. Now, but the General Assembly's involvement, of course, is regulated by the rules, because we are not the primary chamber responsible for peace and security. That responsibility resides with the Security Council. But the Security Council now is in a state, an extant state of paralysis. You cannot get a whole lot in the way of peace and security out of the council. It's very unfortunate, because I think individually, when you speak to council members, they understand the weight of the responsibility they have. But the politics, you can't avoid it. And so we are in this phase. It complicates everything, but we are not giving up hope at all. We are doing our best to rebuild trust and understanding in the United Nations, in the General Assembly, and in the Security Council. I convene from time to time. You know, one of the problems in working in large bureaucracies and organizations is that the size and magnitude of the organization often inhibits good interaction. Because the conference room itself becomes a place where people simply come, regurgitate positions, and leave. They don't engage meaningfully. So I've started to have early morning meetings, 8 o'clock in the morning, Chatham House rules, say what you like, it's not going to be recorded, and let us address some of these issues as individuals, to see whether perhaps we can identify the kernel of an idea that we can work upon to take us to a solution. And you would be amazed at the difference.
This is so exciting. By the way, I want to return exactly to that, but I did promise our audience at some point
Yes?
that I would talk about landmines.
Yes.
This, for those of you who don't know, is it's something that often is used against children. It has a very small explosive charge. It's enough to take a foot off, but not kill the child. I have read that the United Nations has a whole part of the United Nations dedicated to combating landmines. I was wondering, and I kind of want to get back to what we've been previously talking about, and I would never bring this up if I hadn't already started it.
Yes.
But do you have any hope that there's technological breakthroughs for dealing with landmines?
I hope, we hope that such breakthroughs do exist, but thus far, there's not much evidence of that at all. I mean, there are countries in the world where, in fact, the permanent representative of Vietnam told me recently that there was a section of Vietnam that was very heavily mined. They've now been able, after all of these years, manually to remove these mines. And that area has now become one of the most agriculturally productive areas of Vietnam. It's under rice cultivation, providing jobs, livelihoods, and income for the people in that region. But it takes a long time to do that. And there are several countries in the world that suffer this fate. You would have been to Switzerland, no doubt, and seen the chair.
My brother-in-law was the American ambassador to the United Nations mission in Geneva.
Yes. Okay.
So, yes.
Yeah. It's worth going to see the chair because it's really very dramatic, and it encapsulates just in one visual the fate of so many hundreds of thousands of people who have had limbs lost and lives disrupted because of landmines.
By the way, I have promised and committed to the group that that we end at 6:25. I want to ask you a concluding question.
Please.
What gives you hope?
Hope?
Yeah, because there's so many difficult things that you've
I'll tell
mentioned. How do you sleep at night? How do you keep from giving up?
For a long time in the initial stages of the Gaza war, I didn't sleep at night. Because I could not help thinking, here I am in the cushy warmth under this comforter. These people are out in the elements with babies, with children. I just couldn't fall asleep for many, many nights. Now it's a little better. I get about 3 hours sleep per night. But,
I'm glad I'm not your mother. I'd be nagging you.
But I tell you what motivates me, what gives me hope. The young people. The young people. Every time I travel officially, I make an extra effort to engage with young people. And I see the promise, I see the excitement, I see the hope. They want to do great things. They want to make a contribution. They're very confident, very self-assured. They want a better world. They want to be allowed a chance to define what kind of world they will live in. And they have that right, because they will inherit the world. Most of them, very progressive. They send me, we have a link on our website, Ask the PGA, so they can write in questions, and we guarantee them a response within 48 hours. We get floods of questions because they really seem to have a different take. They have this all-powerful, very highly motivated strength that gives them the sense, we can do this, we can solve this, and that is precisely the attitude that we need.
Well, as we conclude, and I figure that we have about 1 minute for concluding, I want to make a comment which involves all of you. We practiced this when we were talking about our beloved chair. If you agree with what I'm about to say, I want you to do something that's never been done in this room before. I want you to show your appreciation, but not until I give you the signal, which is going to be, I'm going to count to 3. But if you agree that our speaker has done something which is, well, I have to explain a theory of life that I have. My theory of life is that the greatest gift one human being can give another is inspiration. Because it's inspiration that energizes you. It gives you hope. It gives you direction. If you agree that the talk that we've heard today was about as inspirational as it gets. I mean, I was listening to you, sir, and I was getting goosebumps. I was wishing I was recording every word that you said. I was feeling inspired. I was ready to leap over tall buildings in a single bound. You, sir, are an inspiration. And if everybody agrees with me, on the count of 3, make noise, but not until we count to 3. You have a job, Mr. President.
I do?
Oh, you do.
The count?
You can count, but your bigger job is to just appreciate the love that's coming your way.
All
Count
right.
with me. 1, Count 2, 3.
Thank you so very much. This is heartwarming, it's overwhelming. I wish that the General Assembly could be as enthused as you are, but many of them are. Many of them are, I have to say. Thank you ever so much for the opportunity of
On
spending
behalf
this
of
time with
everybody,
you.
thank you for taking the time. And as I said, I'm ready to leap over tall buildings in a single bound, supporting what you do, sir.
And if I may, I'd like to do one final thing, which is to complete something that you initiated. You know, as a young diplomat, I was schooled by some of the finest, and they would always say to me, now remember, anything you do, you must always remember to square the circle.
Yes.
So I'm going to square the circle. About this. No one alive knows the full recipe for this product. It's a mystery. There are only 5 people. They're called mixers. Each one knows the ingredient that he or she goes into the secret room and adds. The other 5 do not, the other 4 do not know. This is the only aromatic bitters produced in the world. And I tell you, it's a flavor enhancer. So tomorrow morning, just put a dab, it's a dab, that's all you need, in your orange juice. It will make all the difference to your palate. Trust me. It's a secret.
Love it.
And it's also been given a royal